start up. And in this segment, we want to look at the season as a whole. Does the XFL finally finish the season? If they finish the season, do they have a champion? Who will the champion be? I think the format for the playoffs is like the USFL was last year.
Mm-hmm.
4 teams, 2 games, and then a championship game. So first, let's start with the overview of the season. How do you think it's going to go? What matchups through the 10 weeks are you excited for? And then once we both discuss that, let's talk about predictions like, okay, who's going to make the playoffs? Who's going to be in the championship? Who's going to win the championship?
Now, obviously, all of those questions, are going to be so tough to answer because we haven't seen these teams before, play. Like these specific players playing for these specific teams this year. So it's going to be really tough to pick. I mean, I've roughly looked, done an outline of all the rosters. I made a video on it yesterday, XFL preview. You guys want to check it out. But, I mean, basically – we're not going to really have a good idea what these teams look like until they play. And now to your question about will the league finish a season, I mean, I think they would have finished 2020, but you know what happened. Everyone knows what happened in 2020. It was a very unfortunate, and the season got canceled. And Vince McMahon, basically gave up on it because he didn't want to take any more losses, which I understand. But it really hurt the league. But as long as something like that does not happen this year, and where, anything's getting shut down again or whatever, and you've got Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson owning this thing. I don't think Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is he's going to do everything he possibly can to make this work. Plus you got this league on ESPN and ABC. It's not like the Alliance League where it was on like CBS Sports Network a lot and FS1, where a lot of people don't have those channels. I mean, the XFL is doing a great job with putting this on ABC and ESPN. I mean, the USFL is pretty good with Fox and NBC too. I mean, that there's a lot of people would argue ESPN's better, but I don't really see a problem with Fox and NBC as well. Everybody has, the antenna channels or whatever you want to call them. But I think that as long as nothing crazy happens, this league will make it this year. It's going to finish the season. It's going to have a champion. And I foresee a second season because the USFL is in year 2. And the thing is with the USFL, last season, they had all the games being played in Birmingham, one location. This league, every single team has their own building, which is really important because you're going to have the fans from the local places, going to all the stadiums. Because that was the whole problem of the USFL. I'm like, it was really good to have it in one location because you're only having to pay money for one spot. You're not having to pay for all those stadiums, all that, the travel costs. That was great. All the players were at that one spot. But the issue was you were only making money from fans in one game whenever Birmingham played. If Birmingham wasn't playing, there was no one there. So with the XFL, you're going to have fans for, filling up the stadiums at all these places. And I think more and more people are warming up to these alternative leagues now because people want to watch stuff. It's not the 80s and 90s where it's like people, when the off season was over, just didn't really care. I mean, they might have, missed sports, but they did things. People still do things, but people love just checking stuff out, watching TV, watching sports. If they're on the road, they can look at it on their phone. Social media is big, and that's what's helping these leagues as well. So just this day and age, I think it benefits these leagues more. And plus, there's so many players now that want to play, and there's so many players that are good enough to potentially play in the NFL, but there's not enough roster spots. Players are playing longer now in the NFL. So there's just a lot of room for these leagues to make it. And so I think the XFL is going to make it as long as nothing happens that shuts the season down. I think that there's some pretty, well-known players. A.J. McCarron's in this league. He's a 32-year-old quarterback that you would think, well, he's not in the NFL anymore. He's just done. No, he's playing in this league. It's insane. I know obviously he's the biggest name. It's not like, oh, wow, there's a million names. But you even have Paxton Lynch. I know everybody remembers him as the infamous First round draft pick to the Broncos. It didn't work out. But
DeAndre Francois.
He was elite at Florida State, and then he got hurt, and then he transferred to Hampton and was never heard from again until now. So, I mean, you just look at it. And Hans Ward's a coach. Hans Ward is a coach for a new team, the Brahmas, the San Antonio Brahmas. So, I mean, you just think about it. There's just a lot of cool stuff going on with this league. There's a lot of good coaches. I mean, you've got Wade Phillips. I mean, he was coaching the NFL for a long time. His dad was a legendary head coach. So, I mean, there's good coaches. There's good players. The Rock owns the league. I mean, there's a lot of appeal for this league. It's on TV. So I think that the league's going to make it, and I think it's going to be awesome to watch. That's just my overall take of the league.
Now, I mean, to your point about league survival, I think it can survive. It sucks that it's had to take 3 iterations of the league, but only 2 iterations were taken seriously. The second go around with Vince, and I think with Rock iteration, it's being taken seriously. They've been plastered all over SportsCenter and ESPN lately for obvious reasons, as you stated, with the games being broadcasted on ABC and ESPN, and ESPN having ownership of ABC. There's a lot of good teams in here. I mean, Jordan Ta'amu is another name that we just didn't hear about. And then he was in the first iteration with A.J. McCarron's St. Louis Battlehawks. It falls apart because of the obvious reasons as you stated. And right now, everything is perfect. Knock on wood. My table's wood, so knock on wood. That, to your point, nothing drastic like that happens this time around. But now he's with the awesome DC Defenders and replaced 12-gauge Cardale Jones over there, who is in the IFL. So good luck, 12-gauge over there. Both leagues, as we'll kind of get to, have good exposure. And there's a lot of eyes on the XFL this time around, because if you don't make it through a year completely, you don't make it really off the ground this time, does the XFL fold for good? And I think that if it doesn't make it this time, with having The Rock behind it, I don't think it's a league that can never make it. I mean, to a lot of people's point, the LA Kiss, or whoever it was, not the LA Kiss, the LA team from the first go around of the XFL is still your defending XFL champions. And they've been your defending champions since 2001.
It's crazy.
Because for whatever reason, the XFL is not having success. There's a lot of there's a few repeats, and it's because of having 10 teams in the league, which is fine. USFL, as we'll get to in a bit, runs into the same problem. But there's still good matchups. Like, I think, Arlington and San Antonio could be a threat in the West. Look out for St. Louis for sure. St. Louis is good. Even though, to your point, A.J. McCarron is 32, he's still a good quarterback. I mean, that has to be obvious, because if he wasn't still good at 32, he wouldn't be on the team.
No.
DC is a threat from the East. Houston from the West. I mean, I think you know, it's going to be tight more from, I think, the western half than it will be from the eastern half. I'm not completely sure what the alignment looks like where the cutoff is to make it east and west, but it'd be interesting.
I agree with you when you said about if the league don't make it this time, then I think it's done. I agree with that. I don't think it's going to fail because, again, it's got The Rock, man. I mean, he's not going to let this fail. I really doubt that. As long as nothing catastrophic happens, and it's on ABC, ESPN, it's people, you're going to watch it, man. And plus, think about it.
Mm-hmm.
They started the league less than a week after the Super Bowl. I think that is huge as well because fan interest in football hasn't gone away. Like, you just saw the Super Bowl, and it's almost like this is just an extension to that in a weird way.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, this is the next week of football, even if it's not the NFL. It's just the next week. I mean, I'm not saying the USFL or the Alliance, of American football when they did their league in 2019, starting later. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not saying that because if people know a league's going on, and with social media and everything, people are going to know it exists. They can turn it on if they want to. But I do think this helps having it right after the Super Bowl. And then with this league, if this league does really well, this is going to wrap up right around when the USFL begins, kind of roughly. I think there might be a little bit of it'll be on at the same time.
There's like a 2-week regular season overlap. So when you factor in the playoffs, it's about a month of overlap.
Mm-hmm. But I think that it's just going to be a good transition over and people, tune in. So I think that having it on ABC, ESPN right after the Super Bowl, I think people are going to watch it. To your list of teams that you see as a threat, I think another underrated team is the Orlando Guardians. I think their roster is really good. They got really good, defensive player Nick Coe, out of Auburn, and Cody Latimer. I mean, he was a really good player out of Indiana. I mean, that guy was a second-round draft pick. He's a little older, but he's still only like 29. And, I mean, he's big. So, really the key for them is going to be the quarterback position. If they can get Paxton Lynch or DeAndre Francois figured out who's going to be good at quarterback and that person plays really well, that team could be good. But, I mean, like you said, you go up and down these teams. There are talented players. I mean,
Josh Gordon's back. He's on one of these teams.
I mean, you've got Cole McDonald. Cole McDonald at Hawaii lit it up. I mean, he was throwing for 500 yards and, 5-6 touchdowns a game when he was at Hawaii. I don't know if he'll be the starting quarterback or if it'll be Caleb Elby out of Western Michigan. And like you said, the DC defenders, I mean, you've got Eric Dungy, who was really good at Syracuse in 2019 when Syracuse beat Clemson and they had like a 10-3 year. You've got De'Aaron King, who was really good at Houston, but then he went to Miami and, got hurt a lot and didn't really do anything else there. And then Jordan Ta'amu. He played in the USFL. He was at Ole Miss. I mean, these teams have really good players that are notable enough. Kyle Sloter played in the USFL. He's with the Arlington Renegades. I mean, you just look at all these quarterbacks. Jack Cohn with the San Antonio Brahmas. He was at Notre Dame in Wisconsin. You've got obviously A.J. McCarron with the Battlehawks, and then Luis Perez for the Vipers. He played in the USFL. I just think that overall, you just look at the roster, and that's just the quarterback spot. I just think that there's a lot of really solid players, and you've got notable head coaches. You've got cool names. I mean, the teams are cool. It's more spread out, too. Like, I like the fact with the XFL, besides the fact that you have all of the location, the teams have their own stadium, unlike the USFL. Even though the USFL is branching to 4 this time, it still isn't all 8, which I wish it was, but this league is, and I like how it's very spread out. Like, I like how there's a team in Seattle. I mean, that you don't have that with the USFL. There's nothing west of Texas in the USFL, but in this league, you've got, the Vegas Vipers. You have the Seattle Sea Dragons. There's 2 out west teams. It's more spread out. Even though obviously you do have, the Texas teams, but still outside of that, it's very spread out. I just think the league's constructed really well. And as long as the level of play is high enough for people to want to watch, I think the league will be just fine. I like everything about it.
I mean, to your point, I don't think with The Rock behind it, I don't think he'll allow for the league to fail.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if it somehow starts to fail, do we maybe see a possible? Of course, you would have to get rid of some teams, I think, from the XFL side. But do we possibly see if XFL starts to come down? Do we possibly see a XFL USFL merger?
That would be a last, ditch effort or a last gasp for both these leagues, because I think the USFL would only agree to that if it was struggling, and if the XFL is struggling, the USFL is probably struggling too. I think that, I mean, the with these leagues, I mean, the problem
Mhm.
is that people have to want to watch, these games badly enough. And I mean, for people like me and you, it's football. We're gonna turn it on if we're at home and it's on
Mhm.
TV. We're gonna turn it on. But for some people, they want to watch better football. I mean, there are some people that will never watch this because it's not high level football. I mean, you see like football fans in college, they'll turn on Saturday, you know, on college football on ESPN or ABC or whatever, and they're gonna watch Alabama and Tennessee, and they're gonna watch Ohio State, Michigan, when they play, or Ohio State, Penn State. They're not gonna watch Indiana versus Northwestern, or they're not going to watch Vanderbilt versus Missouri. But some
Mhm.
people will. We will, if we can watch it, or whatever. But some people want to watch better football. And yes, these two leagues, it's definitely a downgrade from the NFL. These players are players that aren't in the NFL. But I still
Mhm.
think that there's enough, you know, name appeal with who's in the league playing for the XFL and the coaches,
Mhm.
and with how ESPN, and Sports Center and all that are promoting this league like crazy. I do think that there's enough there for um, this league to make it, at least this season. I mean, in the future, I mean, 3 or 4 years down the line, if both these leagues are still going, I mean, I don't know. Who knows? But I think for this year, I think it's going to make it for sure. I mean, so you asked also as well who we think's going to, win, the championship. Like I said, that's almost impossible. I mean, I could literally have an argument for all these teams. I really like the McCarron team. I do. I think Mateo Duran at running back is great as well. He was out of Duke.
Mhm.
So I really like, that team.
The
And
Battle
I mean,
Box.
I like the Orlando Guardians if they can get the quarterback situation fixed, um, with whoever's going to be. So the St. Louis Battlehawks, I like the Guardians. And I mean, I'm probably pretty high on Arlington and DC as well. So one of those four teams. I mean, I could see them all though. But yeah, I mean, so you
Mhm.
said we're also picking the week 1 games as well.